Hey there, this is Laura Williams, and I want to welcome you to the Encountering You podcast. I am so glad that you're here today because it means that you're interested in becoming a healthier and more grounded human. It also means that you actually truly care about yourself and that you're curious about how your story has impacted your life. This is the basis for this podcast. Many of us are walking around in the present with wounds from the past that are still operating today. When we think about our stories, meaning my family of origin and what it was like growing up in my home, we don't give enough credence to the impact of certain things on our nervous systems and ways of being. Many people come into my office and are frustrated because in their minds, they had the perfect childhood and they still struggle with being a grounded, healthy adult. That's why we want to look just a little bit deeper into the relational and developmental aspects of your family growing up. Many of us also come into therapy with the idea that if I pray hard enough or I have enough faith, my problems will just go away. While our spirituality is actually a really vital part of our lives, it's not the way we make our issues go away. It is amazing to me that in 2026, a lot of people still think that going to counseling shows a lack of faith, or that holding my parents responsible for the wounds that they may have created is not honoring them. For those of you who still struggle with that, you're welcome here. I will never use faith to justify or to make you feel like you are not enough. This is actually called spiritual bypassing, and it's a dangerous and really unhealthy way of being. And you can rest assured that when we are talking about the harm or the hurt that your caregivers may have caused, we're always going to honor their humanity. I'm a parent, and I always want to be held accountable. But I do not desire to be accused, denigrated, or dehumanized. Very few parents are actually monsters. There are some, but most of us had parents who were well-meaning, and we're always going to honor that. So why are we here today? Well, one of the ways that our family of origin impacts our ability to be a healthy, grounded adult is in the area of our value. When we're born, we do not have the ability to actually value ourselves. That is the job of our caregivers. Unfortunately, even when parents are trying their best to impart value on a little child, they will oftentimes miss the mark. And when this happens, we begin to leave the middle ground of every person has inherent worth and value and begin to venture into what makes a person valuable or not. We might learn that I'm more valuable when I'm quiet, obedient, don't leave things out, don't talk back, don't ask for help, and less valuable when I'm dramatic, when I cry or when I need things, when I ask for help, I struggle in school, embarrass my parents, or dress inappropriately. This seems very innocent at first because we usually use these metrics to measure ourselves. We're critical of ourselves. We feel shame and we strive for the best. But as we get older, we begin to transfer our judgment from ourselves onto others. We begin to compare ourselves to those around us. And when this happens, it starts to create division. We want to know that we're good enough. So in order for that to happen, we have to be better than someone else. In therapy, many people talk about protecting ourselves from others or the world. But we rarely talk about protecting others from ourselves, our judgment. Judgment happens so quickly. I know that I can walk through a grocery store And it takes absolutely no effort to assess a person in an aisle and create an entire narrative about them. I can criticize their clothing, their smell, the pace at which they're moving, what their cart is filled with. This is a fairly benign judgment zone, but if I don't operate with intent in this arena, I'm going to let my judgment get out of hand. And that's when the danger happens. So today, we're going to talk about judgment. Why, in some arenas, it's biologically protective and useful. It's necessary in some situations. And then how to regulate our judgment and practice a posture of curiosity when it's safe. What I want each of you to remember, though, is that we're all human, and all of us are capable of judgment and accusation. So as you're listening today, I would invite you to listen with an open heart, an open mind, and try to stay out of a shame hole if this resonates with you. Remember that in the language of developmental and relational trauma, value is inherent in all humans. So while we have a responsibility for our behavior doesn't mean that we are an awful person. We have to exercise healthy boundaries around our worth and value to protect ourselves and others from judgment. This is about wisdom, regulation, and responsibility, not shame. So many people ask, isn't judgment a necessary part of the human experience? Well, from a biological perspective, yes. Judgment is a part of our threat detection system. It's designed for survival. Judgment is not primarily a moral process, it's actually a protective one. So from a biological standpoint, the brain's first job, right, is not connection or fairness, it's survival. The nervous system is constantly scanning for threat, safety, predictability. This always happens before conscious thought. Fast judgments help us answer questions like, is this safe or is it dangerous? Should I move closer or further away? Do I need to act right now? Without judgment, humans wouldn't survive long enough to be curious. Judgment is the brain's way of asking, do I need to protect myself right now? Neuroscience shows us that the brain forms impressions in as little as 100 milliseconds. That's so fast and way before any conscious awareness. Areas like the amygdala automatically evaluate social cues. Threat detection pathways activate way before the thinking brain. The amygdala rapidly assesses danger. The limbic system mobilizes the body. And then the prefrontal cortex comes online later. This means judgment is fast. Curiosity, it's a little slower. And that order is intentional. If we had to reason our way through danger every time, we'd freeze. From an evolutionary perspective, the brain is biased toward over-detecting threat. This is sometimes called error management. It's safer to assume danger and be wrong than to miss danger and be harmed. So the brain prefers certainty over nuance, speed over accuracy, and protection over connection. This explains why judgment can feel intense, rigid, or absolute under stress. Judgment, when it's necessary, can also be discernment. Discernment is our soul's way of knowing what's right and what isn't. When I think about value, I can think about it in a way that doesn't actually judge a person's value, but can judge a person's behavior. In our close relationships, we may call this accountability. Where the boundary lies is when I assess a person's human value based on their behavior. Judgment is necessary when there's immediate danger, like if I walk outside to a dark parking lot and there's a person standing next to my car. This type of judgment is necessary in order to keep me safe. The judgment isn't, there is a horrible person standing next to my car. The judgment is, this doesn't feel safe to me. So I go back inside my office, lock the door, and call the police. They can accurately assess the situation in a safe way. The person standing outside my car could be completely harmless, but my judgment tells me this is not safe for me to handle this situation alone. There's also boundary violation. When someone is actively violating a boundary that you have, or a boundary that's understood, judgment is necessary and can keep you safe. In our theory of developmental and relational trauma, we believe that the emphasis on the value that each person is inherently worthy. Spanking is a boundary violation. It violates the child's right to feel safe and protected by their caregivers. So, when I'm working with a client, we may discern that the form of discipline that was used actually produced shame, because spanking degrades the value of a human. In this example, we are not calling a caregiver a bad person or a monster. We're simply discerning that this type of discipline is a boundary violation. Another time when judgment or discernment is important is when there's a lack of consent. If I've not given someone permission to do something that would, in normal circumstances, be a boundary violation, then this becomes a place where judgment may be necessary in order to advocate for a change. When we think of a lack of consent, this can be muddy water to walk in. What I will say is no means no. And if someone can't say no because they're impaired, it's also a no. And if you suspect that a person's yes isn't fully a yes, it's also a no. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to use a fairly benign example. We do not have the right to go through someone else's personal property without their consent. If your spouse or your best friend is going through one of your bags without asking, this is actually a boundary violation. And your judgment is telling you, this doesn't feel right. Once you feel this, you can decide what you want to do about it. But you have the right to ask the person not to go through your things. Then there's repeated harm. When someone exhibits behavior that consistently violates your boundaries, it is okay to use your judgment and move away from them. This can be a friendship, a work relationship or situation, a partner, or a parent in extreme situations. I want to state clearly here, though, that moving away or creating more distance helps with what's allowed. If a parent just doesn't see something the same as you, politically, spiritually, this is not necessarily grounds for cutting them out of your life. However, if you find the other person being offensive to another person's humanity, this is the type of example that we're talking about. As you can see, never judging behavior can actually be really dangerous and can be used to excuse behavior or keep yourself in a situation that actually isn't safe for you. Judgment is not appropriate when it's based on identity or appearance. And then we assign value. When we judge someone's value on their appearance, this is when we enter dangerous territory. It assigns worth instead of assessing risk. Judging is human, but staying in judgment is actually not. I'm going to be honest with you. This is actually really tough for me. This is part of why we work so hard on the core issue of value. When we don't hold ourselves in warm regard, we won't hold others in warm regard either. And when we don't hold others in warm regard, we become harmful to others. This is where we use our boundaries inwardly. Judgment is biologically necessary when there is danger. But when judgment stays in charge long after safety is established, it actually stops protecting us and it starts costing us relationship. The problem isn't judgment, it's dysregulated judgment. When the initial threat is gone and we continue to assign value to the situation or the person, this is when the problem starts. Or when we recognize that our judgment isn't actually valid. So before we dive into the deep end, I want to say we all judge. I don't know any person who doesn't or hasn't judged someone else at some point in their life. This is mostly because most of us judge ourselves on a consistent basis. When we think about our proclivity to judge others, it's rooted actually in how we feel about or give value to ourselves. If we value ourselves for being productive, we may judge someone else for resting or taking a day off. We may call them lazy or a drain on society. This is coming from our internal sense that if we don't perform or produce, we will be lazy. So if you judge, try not to judge yourself, but hold yourself accountable when you notice it. Judging crosses a boundary when it assigns worth to someone else, right? When it shames, when it diminishes, when it dehumanizes, okay? Our judgment is imposed instead of contained. Here are a couple of examples where judgment becomes a boundary violation, okay? I'm in the grocery store, and as I look over, I see a person who might be overweight. As I look in their cart, I am disgusted to see that there are 5 frozen dinners, a few cans of ravioli, and a 12-pack of soda. I think to myself, well, that's why you can't lose weight. You are horrible at making decisions that are healthy. The truth is, I have no right to judge this person. I don't know what their situation is. And the reality is that in our society today, it is really expensive to eat healthy. I know that I am looking down my nose at someone when I am looking at my own cart and giving myself props because of my choices. Judging someone's body, weight, dress, tattoos, and then assigning value to their humanity because of this is wrong. Judging belief, race, sex, politics as moral failure is also an area where our judgment becomes a boundary violation. Judging someone because of their marital status, child status, educational resume is also a boundary violation. A person is not worth less because of their life circumstances. As a church, we've placed value on being partnered and raising a family, which means that when we look at others who do not have that same story, people are really likely to judge them. When we project unregulated judgment onto others, we cross into their emotional and psychological space. This is not protection, it's intrusion. So once we know that we're passing judgment, it's time to learn how to regulate it. Like I said earlier, we are all guilty of judgment. So if you find yourself relating to this, please try to hold yourself in warm regard and not in shame. When people struggle with judgment of others, it is just a sign of how harshly you actually judge yourself. When we think about our boundaries, we have 2 types. The first is how we protect ourselves from the world. And this is what a lot of people are really good at. This means that we use our boundaries to filter the information coming at us from others. If someone is judging you, you use these boundaries to only take in what's true. When it comes to judging others, we need to utilize a different boundary. This is called our containing boundary. It's what protects others from us. After we notice our judgment, as soon as we know we're safe, we want to acknowledge to ourselves what we're making up about that person or situation that we've stepped into or that has come across our plates. We're not going to act on this, and we want to choose what we want to express. Our dysregulated judgment is responsible for shaming others, silencing others, and reinforcing harm. Part of being a healthy, functional adult is learning how to hold our judgments without handing them to someone else. This is what ethical boundary keeping looks like. So, in a practical way, what I want you to do is just take a minute, right? We're going to go through some steps so that you can start to practice some of these things in your own life. So, first, when we have a moment where we notice our judgment, okay? Once we've calmed down, what we want to know is, am I safe? Am I activated? Okay. Once I know I'm safe, I can regulate my body, right? Remember, regulation always comes first. Curiosity comes second. Okay. I always say this to somebody, my clients, right? Like if somebody comes into your home, you're not going to ask them why you're here. You're going to run. Okay. So once we know we're safe, then we can be curious. All right. The next step is the internal reminder, right? This person that I'm judging is actually not mine to rank, right? This is a reality check. We are not called to judge others. That's Jesus's job, okay? So then what I want to do is name the judgment internally. What assumption did I just make about this person? Okay. Is it about their behavior or is it about their worth? Right? These are two really important things. Okay. It's okay for us to judge behavior because sometimes that helps us feel safe. All right. There is right and wrong. But when we assign worth to someone based on that, that's where the problem starts. Okay. And then once we assessed all those pieces, right, the next step is choosing expression wisely. Okay. So we want to stay curious. This can mean that we're curious with ourselves, okay, or if it's safe, with the other person. You might need to set a boundary for yourself if you find yourself in judgment and assigning value to that other person. You might want to disengage at that point so that you don't harm the other person. If you're in a discussion with someone or someone says something that you don't agree with or begin to judge them, you can use curiosity language if it's safe, okay? You might say, help me understand, or tell me more about that, okay? And then maybe the most important step is contain what is not yours to share. Not every one of your thoughts deserves airtime, okay? If we open any social media app, most of the things that people share aren't thoughts that you would share if you were standing next to that person. Containment isn't dishonesty. It's actually care for others. So as we wrap up today, I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions to think about. 1, where has my judgment crossed into harm? And again, when I ask you these things, hold yourself in warm regard. Shame holes don't produce change. Second question, how can I better protect others from my unregulated judgment? Remember, judgment keeps us safe in danger. Regulation keeps others safe from us. And curiosity keeps us human in relationships. So as we part for today, I'm going to ask you to just take a deep breath. Check in with where you are today on the continuum of value. Maybe you're feeling less than and feeling shame about yourself. Maybe you're feeling pride or better than someone else. Wherever you find yourself, I just want you to pause and gently bring yourself back to the same as position, the one where we all share inherent worth with everybody else. This is your return to worth. Thank you so much for being here with me. I love being with you. I look forward to being with you next time on the Encountering You podcast.